Hello everyone, I am Holly Taylor and this is my project presentation. All right, a little bit of background on me. I grew up here in Arizona. I did not have a ton of access to multilingual learners in my K-12 experience. I did, however, I love to read and I liked traveling through my books. I've always really liked like historical fiction and traveling in time and different stuff. So I also early on really pursued Spanish as my second language in high school and college. So when I graduated from college, I actually went to school to be an English language arts teacher, like a high school English teacher. But after graduating, I wanted to live abroad, so I took a job in León, Guanajuato, to teach English as a foreign language there, which is very different from what I had gone to school for. And I had no idea how to teach English as a second language. I didn't know anything about like phrasal verbs and present, continuous and stuff like that. But I learned quickly because I had to, and actually quickly fell in love with teaching language. And after that, I taught another year in San Jose, Costa Rica. So I have a little star here and a star here. So my first 2 years teaching were actually abroad and to adult learners. All right, but teaching English as a second language or teaching English to speakers who speak other languages or culturally and linguistically diverse individuals in the States or abroad really combines like everything that I love, which is learning, traveling, stretching myself to understand people and places and experiences that I myself have not experienced. I just enjoy working with others. And learning from people through their stories, and so teaching really works for me. Where I teach is Alhambra High School. Alhambra High School is located in the greater Phoenix area, a bit west Phoenix. The area where I teach is the school where I teach and the surrounding area and the schools in that area are predominantly Title I schools. So they are, there's a predominant majority of students who receive free and reduced lunch due to their socioeconomic status of being below the poverty line. The community or the school where I teach, Alhambra High School, it serves almost 3,000 students, and 700 of those students are classified as ELD students per the state proficiency test called the AZELA. So we have a really large ELD population compared to other schools in the area and just generally. Beyond that, the school itself is a 90% Spanish speaking, and the other 10% are largely other language speakers. So we have a relatively and comparatively high population of refugee status students that came here from Uganda, Rwanda, the Myanmar, Burma area, Syria, Afghanistan. And so it's a really diverse school, and there's a little, they call it in the district, it's like the little UN, our school. It's really great. This is actually my classroom right here. All these little signs say welcome in a bunch of different languages, so it's nice. The students that I have in classroom, a little bit more about my specific students and where I did my practicum, where I teach. So I teach intermediate. For those of you unfamiliar with what intermediate means in Arizona, it is the highest level of English proficiency per the AZELA test prior to being proficient. And once you hit proficient on that test, you are taken out of ELD classes and into non-ELD classes. So these students, because they're at the intermediate level, they're all conversational, they have a functional level of English. Many students you wouldn't know even had another language because they've spent the majority of their lives here in the United States. They don't have an accent, they speak English, some of them predominantly. But what keeps them in the intermediate bubble, the intermediate purgatory, sometimes they say, is the lack of academic skills that are required to pass the Azella test and that are often required in those other classes. Now, as a separate aside, there are specific skills that are privileged over others in these school systems. And so while I say that these students have a lack, I don't mean that in deficit thinking, like they don't have some things. These students, it's possible that we as the school do not have an expanded enough definition of achievement. And so as a result, students are not able to flourish in their academic experience because they are trying to fit themselves inside of a bubble of the creation that is not open enough to the diversity of language that students at Alhambra High School have. So one last thing, because I think this is really important when I think about the specifics of my classroom, but it also can apply to ELD in general, especially when you have that like long-term ELD student or those intermediate classes that are just like really hard, really easy to get stuck in. So, being an ELD student can mean so many different things. It can mean that, you've lived here your whole life, you learned English at the same time that you learned your other language. You maybe have only ever been to school in English settings. You might not be literate in your other language. That's the case for a good number of my students. At the same time, I have students that came here from a different country in middle school without knowing any English and have worked their way to intermediate proficiency. I have students that have really strong academic and literacy skills in their first language, and students that didn't have school experiences until they came here as adolescents and started learning English. So because of the population of our school, we have just such an incredible diversity, which makes my job really exciting, but makes it really important for me to continue to do the research for how to best support students at whatever level that they present. My practicum focus, and let me move this, my practicum focus was reading comprehension strategies. I was specifically looking for strategies that were able to foster independent reading comprehension, meaning I taught students a strategy that they could take and put into another classroom or in another context to find comprehension in other texts as well. So we used a novel and some nonfiction texts in my class, but what I emphasized was the strategy that they would hopefully be able to practice enough times and be able to use independently. But really what I was hoping for was to foster an enjoyment of reading. And to do that, I had to really extract the tasks and the workload of having a bunch of assignments and writing tasks that I associated with the reading. And I did that by fostering a lot of peer interaction. So I promoted, facilitated, and leveraged peer interaction, which according to the research of Martín Beltrán and the zone of relevance, which says that students, when they work with one another, they can have shared experiences and they could find creative ways to draw upon one another's shared contextual knowledge and engage in translanguaging practices. So, and I paraphrase that. What I wanted to see take place was for the thinking practices that that facilitated comprehension to be something that was done collaboratively, because I felt that I wanted students to be thinking and engaging and reflecting about what they were reading without having that be associated so much with work and boring and taxing. And so I used peer interaction and kind of like casual, low stakes conversation as a way to build both comprehension in the text, but also to simply enjoy it. I did find that when students were, I think I should mention that putting two students together and saying talk about a text sometimes doesn't really work. So I want to say that prior to having students interact with each other or collaborate in pairs or small groups on academic tasks, prior to doing that, I invest heavily in community building activities that are non-academic. So we will like play Uno, we will play these problem-solving games, we will have, I really do invest in them becoming very comfortable with one another, not just the same people, but I move them around a lot. We learn everybody's names. So first and foremost, for peer interaction to work the way that I wanted it to work, I really needed to invest in a climate in the classroom that allowed them to feel comfortable engaging with each other on a casual level, so then they could do it at an academic level. And I found that it really worked out. Part two of my finding, when they did work collaboratively, I started using some translanguaging practices as well. So having students, for example, read a chapter and then like draw a picture on their own, or maybe write a sentence to process something that they imagined when they were reading, as a way to kind of process their own thoughts. Then they would take that and explain it to a language partner in their other language. So they were kind of wrestling with the text in multiple languages, which sort of delved them deeper into comprehension. But because it was just conversational, it didn't feel so, like I said, taxing. I'm not asking for a ton of written work, but I'm still asking for thought work. But they were supported by their peers in doing that. I found that, and I'm going to reference the second quote, so I'm going to read it. Encouraging students to speak and write in their heritage languages can give them opportunities to clarify misconceptions in text, tap into their background knowledge, and demonstrate their understandings. So, and I saw this work out well. There were things, and I want to say before I run out of time, this is my second go, and I'm trying to close before the 15 minutes. There were parts that I found more challenging in this overall practicum. So things that I want to explore, or things that didn't get included in this project, was assessing students on their comprehension of a text if I'm not having there be a physical product. If oral interaction is how they are demonstrating and facilitating their comprehension, how do I assess that? That was something that was challenging that I'll go into in my project. And then secondly, there were some ways in which I, simply teaching them a strategy to use is not like a, here, I'm showing you that this exists, now go do it. There's a lot of like modeling that I have to do that I didn't realize I had to do. But I wanted to share with you the things that were successful, which is, developing a strong classroom culture where they feel comfortable with one another, figuring out who works well together, and then using and leveraging that. And then when possible, using translanguaging practices, which at first felt a little weird, and they reflected, Miss, this is weird. But over time, they really enjoyed it. And I want to hopefully bring in perhaps family, or like bringing, finding a way to use translanguaging to connect what's happening in our classroom also with what's going on at home. So, I want you to record yourself speaking to your aunt about the book that we're reading, something like that. I had a great time in this class, and I look forward to watching all of your project presentations. And yeah, It was nice working with you.